So it's relatively new. I ran a box scheme with George, which started in 2013. So we effectively built a software to solve a lot of the headaches that we were having. This week we will probably process about 7,000 veg boxes will be sold on the platform. By the summer, that looks like with the users that are onboarding with us, that it'll be the best part of 10,000. So we are now starting to get to a point where the data that we can look at across our user group is starting to become really interesting, and we can start to learn quite a lot from how customers are behaving. We know, I know that George and Sandy Lane will probably feel like one end of a spectrum, one end of a scale for a lot of you in terms of this is like maximum customer choice, and the likelihood is that most of you will be further towards, but there will be less choice involved. But the idea of if the software does its job, we can help you offer as much choice as you feel appropriate while mitigating the risk of food waste or financial losses or the feeling that you might be overburdened by complexity in the packing shed. So that's what we are working towards. I'm going to try and speak for a half an hour, less than half an hour. There's far too much data in here. We could talk about any one of these particular areas for half an hour on its own. But we're going to go through sales, customer acquisition and retention, basket spend, add-on shopping. So basically, a lot of what George has touched on, but the actual numbers behind it. So you can have, and most of these numbers are Sandy Lane specific. So you'll get a good nosy into what George is doing and how his customers are behaving. From my point of view, good data makes for good decision making. So it's not about the software trying to tell you how to run the business, but it's about giving you the information to basically back up your instincts, so you can have a higher level of confidence when you make decisions. I really like this chart, but it's not actually that useful to me. So when we're looking at data and looking at metrics to measure, it's really important that they are useful, that they are repeatable, they're measurable. While also recognising that every box scheme, while selling veg boxes is really complicated, as everybody knows, but also no two box schemes are exactly the same. So this is absolutely not the case of trying to say, if you're at one end of a scale, like customer choice is good, lack of customer choice is bad. It's actually about understanding, or maybe prompting you to think about, where do I sit on the scale? What do I do well? Where are the opportunities for me to do better? I'll start with basics first. George talked about the trend in seasonal sales. This is Sandy Lane sales across 2023 and 2024. The shape of this is entirely consistent with every VegBot scheme on the platform. So the arrows are just highlighting, February half term, Easter, the decline into the summer. I've been there. I'm sure we all have. Going into the middle of August, and you start to worry whether you're ever going to have a business ever again. But the customers do come back, and we see October half term, a steady decline as we get towards Christmas before that big spike in average basket spend. And similarly, George talked about new customer trends in the new customer sign-up behaviour. Again, it's like gym memberships. There's like a lot of New Year's resolutions, huge amount of sign-ups proportionally in January that follows through into February before bottoming out in the summer. And then we see that back to school, right? We're out of the chaos of summer. We're getting back into the routine. Right, I'll start getting my veg box again. So we can see there are specific times of year where maybe if you have a limited marketing budget, there are certain times of year that might be more useful for you to spend that money potentially. We will come on to look at retention, but when I first put these numbers together for the Oxford Real Farming Conference in January, and it was the first time we'd looked at it, and we realised that in those 24 months, George had signed up 1,046 new customers, which is an average of 44 a month, which, if we're being honest, was really surprising, because a lot of the talk around how do we help the business grow was about, we need new customers. Whereas actually the conversation started to change a little bit to, actually, we're doing a decent job of getting new customers, better than we realised. Where are they going? Because if we were keeping those customers, the business would be skyrocketing. So we'll come on to that. I should say that everything that you see on the screen, I'm really happy can be emailed, links to all of it can be emailed out to you via George or the OGA or me. So the presentation and the blogs and whatever I show you. So don't worry about taking pictures or anything. We'll get you a copy of it. I think the value of some of what we're doing here is, and where we are as a software business, is we're starting to sort of build a data-driven understanding of what a VegBox scheme is like to run, like who are our customers, what are they buying, why are they buying it, and then we're at the phase where we are starting to understand that, so we know what the right questions to ask are, so we can focus our efforts and work out where the opportunities are to give you the tools to make life easier and more profitable. We looked here at who George's active customers were in December. So, as mentioned, Sandy Lane went live in October 2022. So one of the metrics we looked at is how many days old our customers were, like how many days have they been actively shopping with us. So bear in mind that the maximum number of days was 792, that's their maximum age. And the median days active that customers was 707 in December. So that meant that over 50% of the customers that were shopping had been shopping for more than 2 years. And you can see, well, I don't know if you can see, to be honest, but you just have to trust me. This is the distribution from 0 days to 792. And the vast majority of customers that were shopping are at this end of the scale. So you'll know this anecdotally, that VegBox customers are fiercely loyal. And while selling VegBoxes is really hard and complicated, actually the flip side of that is that once you've got a customer, they tend to be very loyal, and the average lifetime spend for George's customers in December was already £1,000, and on average they'd shop 43 times each, spending £25.16 on average per shop. So that's really incredible for any sort of retail, really, because I'm sure you've probably experienced, if you sign up as a new customer to an online retailer, in those first weeks you're bombarded with mail shots. And that's because in most other forms of retail, the lifetime value of a customer is really concentrated in the first 30 days. They know their best chance of getting money out of you is in those first few weeks. Whereas actually the really cool thing about what we're doing is the lifetime value is really tied up over multiple years. So there's a good news story. Going back to the realization about the number of new customers George was successful in signing up, we wanted to look at where they were going. So how do we work out what our retention rates are? Well, to do this, we looked at, so who's shopping with us now? So who shopped with us in December? And we went back in time. So we went back in time to January. We looked at the spikes in customer sign up. So we looked at January 2023, where 116 customers signed up. 28.4% of those are still active. So 2 years later, just under a third. We looked at January 24, and almost an identical percentage are still active. So what that's telling us is that we are keeping about a third of our customers, or 3 in 7. Interestingly, what it's also telling us, if we can get them to 12 months, we're almost definitely getting them to 24 months, which is pretty cool. Looked at September being that first sort of back to school, that secondary spike in the year, and the retention rate was almost identical. And then, just out of interest, for a bit of fun, looked at the quietest time in the year, which was June, to see if there was any difference. And while absolute numbers of sign-ups were lower, being the lowest part of the year, the percentage of those customers still shopping was actually a little bit higher. So there's not enough people to be confident to say that that's a fact, but it's still a good news story that you're probably keeping a higher percentage of customers at quieter absolute times.
Do you think that was April Farm Sunday effect? Were you signing people up at April Farm Sunday?
I think we had a stall out and no one was interested in veg boxes, they were interested in tractor trailer rides and I think what this does say is that if someone finds you when you're off season, if you like, they really want to be with you. So don't neglect those periods or those new customers at that point because they are very likely to be quite low.
Yeah, it would have been more useful if I'd have overlaid a long-term retention line on these absolute numbers, but because it's probably a bit flatter than the absolute trend. This is just another way of looking at it. It's the same thing. This is a retention funnel starting in January, going through 2024 to December. And this is how good we are at retaining that initial cohort of customers. So there's an initial drop-off in those first few weeks, and then a steady decline before it starts to plateau to around 30%, just over 30% now. So we can say with quite a high level of confidence that in the long term, for every 10 customers, George is keeping 3 out of every 10 new customers. So he knows now, whenever he's doing any marketing activity, he can start to measure how expensive and how much it's costing him to sign up a new customer. But that matters, and we'll look at where those customers go now, because what we then realised is that of those 7 customers that have fallen off, that have stopped shopping, the vast majority of those do so within the first few weeks. And this breakout chart visualises how many orders the customer has made before they stop shopping. The blue, which is 54%, is after 1 shop. So this is of the 7 out of 10 that stop shopping. A remarkable 54% do so after one order. Then what's really interesting is that they effectively have a 1 order half-life, because 50% of those that remain stop shopping after 2 orders, then another 50%, then another 50%. So by the time you get to order number 5, 85% of customers have stopped shopping. Which is why, I don't know if you'll have noticed over the years, if you look at Abel and Cole and how they've spent money and marketed to customers on free. I remember going back years when we were trying to compete for new customers and looked at how they were doing it. There was free tea towels, free olive oil, free cookbooks, and it just felt so out of reach running a small bot scheme to be able to compete with that. And you think, well, how can they afford it? But if their metrics are similar, well, they realise that actually only 15% of their customers are getting to order number 5. So if they throw the book at, like they have done recently, at 50% off order number 1, box number 4 free of charge, I thought, no, it's not actually that expensive, because we know there's a reasonable chance if we can get customers through that used to receiving a veg box, and maybe that takes 5 or 6 orders, and we can keep them long term, then they're incredibly valuable to us. So we probably see that trend being consistent across the board. And then the next question for us is then what can we do within those first 4 or 5 deliveries to try and make sure that customers don't stop shopping? Like, why are they stopping shopping? How can we prevent that from happening? So George's average basket spend is currently, well, over the last 12 months, £25.16. Interestingly, that is up from £20.50, so it's up 23% pre-October 22. And we also know that the typical basket is made up of 77% of a boxed item and 23% of add-ons. That was for our entire user group from January to November of 2024. So what that means for George is that £19.37 is being spent on a boxed item, so veg or fruit that's bought in a box, and £5.79 is being spent via add-on items. We'll come on to look at a breakdown of those in a bit more detail next, which is here, in fact. Oh, you definitely can't read this, but this is last week, week 11 of 2025. 95% of George's orders contained a veg box. So yes, George said that he allows customers to shop and make up their own, basically their order. They have to spend a minimum of £20. And you gave the example of boxes of bread. We're still seeing 95% of customers start their shop with a box. 57% of orders included at least one add-on. Now, that feels quite important to me to be aware of, because when we go back to look at the £25 something of average basket spend, or that add-on, that £5 to £6 of average add-on spend, that's coming from only 57% of customers. So actually, those 57% of customers are probably spending more like 30 something pounds each on average. So what we're saying is, if you can get a customer to start to buy one add-on, you can probably get them to spend an extra £10 above the cost of the box. So there's 43% of customers there that are only buying a box. So there's a big opportunity for George to think, who are those customers? What could I do to encourage them to buy bread or to buy eggs? You might be able to make this out. This is the share of the 23% that's made up outside the box. This is how that's broken down. The nice thing is that a third of that is made up of veg items. So that's likely to be higher margin items that might be Sandy Lane farm grown. So that's good.
Just to be clear, that's 30% of add-ons,
Yeah.
not 30% of veg items in the box. This is veg on top of the box.
Yeah, just stop me. If anything, if I'm rattling through things too quickly or not being clear enough, which is probably most of the time, just let me know. Yeah, so that's a third of the 23% of add-on sales. Just over a quarter is eggs by value, which is great, because eggs is a very nice product. It's relatively easy to sell, and you get a solid margin per box. And I think the margin needs to be factored in when you consider how valuable those items are to you. Some items like milk, dairy, but George talked about butter, but let's say milk, it's low margin, low value. It has a handling cost potentially. You might need to do some overnight storage. It has a temperature issue potentially on the van or on the doorstep, but it might be an amazing product that every time the customer opens their fridge, which is 25 times a day, they see a product that they can only get from you and not from the supermarket. So there's value outside of a margin potentially with something like that. We talked about this. This came up a few times actually. There's quite a lot going on here, but this is a visualization of the subscription type. So our customers buying weekly, fortnightly, or one-off, and George allows all three. What was the green is this is looking at one particular week for Sandy Lane. The green is items that are on a weekly subscription. The red is fortnightly, and the blue is one-off. And what we were quite surprised by is the number of veg boxes that are bought on a one-off basis. because we know George's customers are very loyal. We know the average, the average active shopper has shopped 43 times in the last 12 months. So that tells us that these customers, there might be something psychological rather than just logical going on with them, that they want to shop regularly, but they don't want to add something to their basket that says, I get this every week. We don't know, but it's interesting for us to try and find out. Yeah, the number was 15.
Well, the backbone of business there is regular weekly subscriptions, so it's well over 50%.
Yeah, I mean, you've got 85% of total revenue is made up through weekly and fortnightly subscriptions, and like on our platform within our our user community, we have users at all ends of the scale. We have some users that only allow weekly subscriptions, don't publish box contents, so the customer has to get what they're given, no dislikes, no swaps, and we'll come on to look at that. But across all of our users, regardless of whether ad hoc shopping is encouraged, weekly and fortnightly continue to make up the vast majority of the revenue. Yes.
Kind of a joint question. In terms of like customer behaviour, do you find that people are buying veg that would last them a week, or do you think people are just buying a bit here and there?
Question? I don't know.
I don't know. I'd be tempted to say they're buying veg that will last them a week because of the variety of basket sizes that we see. And George, your smallest box, I mean, if you just take the value of it, what is it, 12 pounds or?
The value box with no swaps is £12.50. Yeah, £12.
So entry price point £12.50, but then the average price that's spent on a box is more like £19.50, and we obviously know some people spend quite a bit more. So I know for the first 4 or 5 years of the box scheme, I made every delivery, and I used to see Riverford, I'd deliver on a Thursday, but Riverford would deliver to the area on a Monday, and there'd be plenty of sheds that I would leave boxes in that would have a Riverford box in as well. It's a bit like trying to offer guidance on a product. This box will feed X amount of people. It's like, how long is a piece of string, isn't it? Well, how long is it going to last me? Well, how much veg do you eat? I've got no idea.
Not enough.
Yeah. These are within there's a data hub within the admin system, and this is just a little visual of looking at swap data, which actually I'll probably show you it now in real time. I looked at the first 50,000 swaps that customers made across the platform this year, which was basically up until week 11, so up until last week, to see if there were any particular trends. And I wrote, there's an accompanying blog, so I'll send you, or I'll make sure that you have access to this so you can have a nose through it yourself. I think it's actually really interesting for everybody, regardless of whether you allow customers to make swaps in their orders. You might never have any intention to do so. But what it does, it's the only data on our system that comes from the customer, whereas everything else, all the other customers are buying, obviously what we've put there for them to buy, but this behaviour in particular is the only part that the customer is telling us, like within the box, I want this and I don't want that. So I think it's interesting for all of us, because whether you are planning content, whether you tell the customers what's going to be in the bag or the box or not, it's sort of a bit by the by, because it helps us, rather than trying to just guess anecdotally what the customers like and what they don't like, we're actually looking at data which is genuine evidence as to how they're behaving. I will show you the blog that I wrote is here. Let Them Eat Turnips, it's called. I don't really have time to go into too much detail right now, but you can, like I say, you can have a proper nosy through this. This is I've basically calculated an index of popularity based on the behaviour of customers swapping items in and out of their box, and but we need, for that to be valid, we needed to take into consideration how many times an item has appeared in a box, because for an item to be swapped out, it has to be in the box to start with. So we can't work in absolute numbers. We need to work in relative terms. And anyway, the takeouts here are the least popular items were Jerusalem artichokes, and then there were some predictable findings, but there were also some surprises. Like, for example, we looked at I'm just going to skip past this for a second. We looked at mushrooms. Oh. I'll see if I can make this a bit bigger. No, I can't. We noticed, so George, you anecdotally said that you kept running out mushrooms?
Yeah, so we have veg boxes which we pack on Wednesday, and then we have the shop Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then we have farmers market on Saturday. So I was noticing that pretty much for the whole of the early part of the year, we just didn't have any mushrooms at all for the market. They were just gone, despite me ordering about 10 to 15 trays extra from the boxes that I didn't think I needed, I did need. And it got me really curious as to why so many, where all the mushrooms were going. So I looked into the swap data, and I could see that an awful lot of people were swapping in mushrooms for things that were in the boxes a lot, like cabbage, like kale. And it just made me realise that, particularly for the hungry gap, when produce maybe is not that appealing, or you've got a lot of fatigue for certain products getting into the hungry gap, having a set of really accessible, proper, popular swaps is really important, and mushrooms was one of those things. And it just allowed, I reckon it keeps customers with you when they might otherwise leave you.
Yeah. So we looked at if you're a veg box data nerd, then the really exciting thing about that is you can say, right, the proportion of mushrooms that are being swapped into boxes seems to be really high, because we know from the data that mushrooms were in 52% of the boxes that George planned. This is I'll send you access to this table as well, so you can basically see how customers behaved across all of these items. And here they're ordered by least popular to most popular. So avocado, when it's available as a swap, was incredibly popular for people to swap in, as were other items that probably go into hot drinks potentially as well, like lemons, ginger, turmeric, things that may be grown further afield. We saw some interesting numbers from sweet potatoes, and whether that's because they bought in from further afield. So there's a bit more of a split between how customers are behaving. Not really sure, but the interesting thing is we can start asking questions as to why those numbers are different to the average. Anyway, when it came to the mushrooms, we could then look at what's happening with them. So we can look in the data to then see what mushrooms have been swapped in for. And I don't think you have any chance of reading that, but these are the weeks of 2023 for Sandy Lane across the top. And then this is what mushrooms have come in for these items. And the darker the cell, the higher the number, essentially. And mushrooms have been swapped in for Jerusalem artichokes 55 times. And similarly, if you were to add the cabbages up, pointed cabbage 23 times, Savoy cabbage 31 times, tundra cabbage 20 times. So there's one maybe question about cabbage, and obviously cabbage and different varieties of cabbage have been very prevalent in boxes because of the time of year. but then also there seems to be a relationship between what mushrooms are being swapped in for, which goes beyond just cabbage. So the next phase of investigation for us is to try and answer some of these questions. And the exciting thing for us is this might seem a little bit abstract, but where the real value is coming back to forecasting and helping you forecast customer behaviour and demand more, to give you the option in the future to potentially offer customers more choice without risking those any waste or losses. So that's what's really exciting for us, because George now can go to his system, for example. This is in the data hub in George's system, and actually say, do you know what, I'm planning my boxes for week 13, so I'm gonna look at, if I'm connected to the internet, I'm gonna look at 2024 of week 13, and then George can see what items were swapped in. Let me just refresh that. I'm struggling for signal, sorry. I'm on the edge of the Wi-Fi network, sorry. But George can basically go back to this week of 2024 and 2023 and see what items customers were swapping out of the box. And where that becomes exciting for us is that if you're buying in from wholesalers, you're having to effectively forecast what the demand is going to be. And even if you're publishing your box contents, you're trying to think, how's that going to change between when I'm publishing them now and when I go to pack my boxes? And what we can start to do is look at how that data has changed between when that data was made available to the customer and when the order deadline took place. So we can then start to build a picture of seasonal behaviour from customers to then give you that information to say, you might want to order in X percentage more of this or X percentage less of that. I'll see if I can just pull, if that's going to...
Wouldn't you just put mushrooms in the box more often instead of cabbages?
I have cabbages. I want to sell as many as I can, so I will put them in all the boxes, but allow people to swap them out. And B, if I put them in every box, then I'd find that they got swapped out as well, because they've been in every box. So it's a little bit of a balancing act between getting rid of the stuff that I grow, but allowing the option to come in, not to be something that's not quite vanilla, but it's a little less contentious than maybe a cabbage.
Do you think it might make you grow slightly less cabbages?
Potentially. The challenge is that at this time of year there's not a lot of other options, and I do actually sell an awful lot of cabbage, despite the fact that how many are swapped out. So maybe I've got a silent majority of people are just putting up with cabbage. Maybe that's the case, but I don't know. Given this time of year, cabbage is a really good staple to have in the fields.
And it may just be that they last in 2 weeks. People like cabbage, but you can keep it for 2 weeks.
That is 100% what's exciting, because George talked about trying to minimise the time between order deadline and when it's delivered. That's on the basis that the customer opens their fridge, sees a cabbage or a root vegetable that keeps well, and says, oh, I've got that. It's not on my dislikes list because I like it, but I don't want a cabbage this week. And then they swap it for something else, and it means that their partner, who hates cabbages, isn't then moaning at them saying, "Well, we've got bloody cabbages filling the fridge." And, but on a serious note, that's the sort of thing that would encourage someone to stop shopping and go like, "Well, I've had enough. I've been trying to do the right thing. I've had enough," because it's more about asking your customers to do the right thing. Well, if they can do the right thing and get what they want, that's the magic combo, I think. So this is, George can look at the last, like these couple of weeks of 2024 and see what was being swapped out or swapped in. Crown Prince was being swapped out a lot. Yeah, I think you must have had a lot of it. You must have had a good year for
What
Crown.
year is this?
Last year. You had, look at that.
Half of something or a slice of something in a small box. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, we wouldn't sell many whole crown prints, but I would sell a slice of crown prints or half the red cabbage in a small box. It's great, but people just look at it and
But you, so
If I was to wave a magic wand, I would love to grow just 1 kilo squashes.
yes.
But unfortunately, Crown Prince do store so well.
you had, so in week 12 of last year, you had 68 people swap out Crown Prince, and in week 13, you had 47 people swap out Crown Prince.
But
Which?
I had Crown Prince in every single box every week because I had 7 tons in the packing shed, so I had to get rid of it.
Yeah. You also had 15 people swap it in, so you didn't put it in every box.
Maybe they wanted extra.
Well, do you know, but that's really interesting because we would have thought, when we first started seeing swap data, we were really excited because then, like George said, for the first time, you're seeing what customers want. And I've got, I think I've got it up here. This is in George's live basket data here. That's for Sandy Lane for this week. And there's a swaps report here. And so he can see, I probably shouldn't have it up, but you can see how many people have swapped in what item. I'll come off there. It's just got a few customers' names on it, which isn't. But it's very surprising because with something like beetroot, you realise actually how popular beetroot is. I don't know if these numbers will back me up, but beetroot has been swapped in here. You know, it was probably in a lot of boxes in this week, but it was swapped in 16 times in week 12 of 2024. So it's just giving George that freedom to diversify that risk, as he talked about, across the range of boxes without feeling like he's going to upset too many customers. I will hurry up. Talking about not upsetting customers, we saw Jerusalem artichokes being something of a Marmite veg, and actually, despite only being in 8% of the boxes that have been planned on growing goods so far in 2025, they were swapped out a lot. They were also swapped in quite a bit, but we crunched the numbers for George pre-swaps and post-swaps. And post-swaps, he's getting 0 complaints from customers about them because they have the freedom to avoid them, but is selling between 3 and 4 times as much. So the amount of noise he would get from customers that were upset at receiving them pre-choice basically prevented him from putting them in hardly at all. So the sales were a third or a quarter of what they could have been. So that's a really nice example of how we're actually selling more of what's available right now. So we're sort of doing the right thing by everybody, and we're making customers happy at the same time. The bounce that George enjoyed was pretty significant. It added up to 30% extra on his sales in the first 12 months. But that's, regardless of how big that number is, it's the combination of average basket spend and number of weekly orders that I think is important, because it's both. It means that growth is likely to be profitable growth, as in we're not just doubling the orders overnight and having to buy another van or pay more drivers. It's basically doing a bit more with everything that we have, which is likely to be profitable. I don't know, I will skip through some of this because I'm conscious that we're overrunning all around, but this next bit was about customer centricity, because we looked at, like I say, we have a diverse range of users on the software platform, some that offer lots of choice, some that don't offer any at all. And we wanted to look at what the data told us to see the strengths and weaknesses, or strengths and opportunities, if you like, of those models. So things we considered making up that customer offer is how big is your range. Like we have a couple of users that have nearly 1,000 products on their system. George you have something like 120 add-on products. It's around that mark. But how big is your range? Do you encourage ad hoc shopping or do you allow it? Do you publish your box contents in advance? Do customers know what they're going to get before they pay for it? Do you allow them to avoid items they don't like? Do you allow swaps? Do you deliver to a customer's home, or is it collection point only, or both? And is there a shopping window? And what I mean by that, is there a point in the week where customers are encouraged to go onto the site to shop? Some box schemes are more of a membership and a subscription management tool, whereas some is more of a customer encouraged to shop relationship. So that all feeds into it. And then we wanted to look at some metrics to measure across that range. So when we looked at retention, we saw how difficult it was to get customers to order number 5 and beyond. What's our long-term retention? What's our average basket spend? And how good are we at getting new customers over the line? This is, from 1 is a very simple customer offer with almost 0 choice. 8 is maximum choice. And I'll cut to the chase a little bit here, but what we saw is the box schemes that had high levels of choice, big range, shopping window, encourage ad hoc shopping, were really quite successful at getting new customers over the line. Actually, this tells us that 4% of this particular user, 4% of their weekly trade was made up of new customers, and their average basket spend was £33. Whereas at the other end of the scale, 1% of weekly trade was new customers, and the average basket spend was £16.70. So a stark difference. However, the reverse of that, when we look at retention, is true, because yes, we're not quite as successful at getting new customers over the line if we're not offering as much choice, and the threshold is therefore higher. But once we do get them over the line, we're retaining long-term a really high percentage of them. So there are real strengths at both ends of the scale. So like I said before, it's not saying that one is good and one is bad. It's actually about recognizing why. It's just thinking like, where do I sit on the scale? Why am I doing it? And what are the strengths of this model, and how can I reinforce that with my communication to my customers? That's what I've just said basically. The strengths of maximal customer choice is higher basket spend, a healthy number of customer sign-ups. You're increasing the breadth of your target audience. We're George would describe it as sort of nudging into the mainstream. So rather than just appealing to fairly hardcore shoppers that want to support their local growers and they're doing the right thing and they don't mind what you send me, I'll trade my potatoes with my neighbour, whatever it may be, which is great. But the mainstream doesn't quite think like that. So the more choice we have, the bigger our potential audience. And we also can learn from customer-led decision making. We can understand more about what the customers are responding to. The strengths at the other end of the scale is like zero waste, or we're likely to be much closer to zero waste, which is obviously brilliant. We retain that sense of control, and the percentage of retention is really high. So there are strengths to celebrate at both ends. And then finally, George talked about store analytics. So George can see in his admin system activity on the site, and so the basics are George can see that in this 7-day period, 65% of customers that visited the website did so via a mobile phone. So it's important that the mobile shopping experience is good. This is 7 days worth of website traffic for George. We can see that these two spikes are Monday and Tuesday. George mentioned it before. The Monday spike is driven by the nice glossy mailer that's sent out with news from the farm, recipes, highlighted products. The Tuesday mailer is the Tuesday spike in traffic is due to that automated deadline reminder email, which is far more transactional. Like, it comes from the system, but it has the basket contents for the customer and basically says you've got 4 or 5 hours left to shop. And they might appeal to slightly different types of brains, essentially. The second one is more like, right, it's now or never. This is how much money you're going to spend in 5 hours' time. You better do something. So you're covering 2 bases there and doing a really good job of driving a massive percentage of website traffic in those 2 days in a week where George wants people on his site to spend money. This is not quite as interesting, but we can start to do some quite interesting things with understanding how customers shop on the front end. So this is in the analytics tool that we have. So building a conversion funnel, and VegBox shopping is different to shopping for t-shirts or trainers, and we have configured a series of sort of bespoke events so we can look at how customers are interacting with the stores and understand where the opportunities are for improvement. It's all completely anonymous, so we don't know, we can't identify anybody from it, but we can learn about how they're interacting with the site.
Sorry, I have a question. Like, do they have to order every week, or they can subscribe and automatically they get every week?
You can fully engage with the website and do that, but alternatively you can just set up the subscription, forget about it, and then it just comes every week. So it basically meets both types of customers.
Yeah, it's up to them. But like I say, on our software we have users at every end of every scale almost. And then I think that's it for me. Like,
What Steve means is that there are some people on Growing Good who allow no choice whatsoever. You can't even change your subscription. You're just having a weekly box and that's it. And I think one even doesn't show any add-ons or boxes at all, no content.
yeah.
And then there's the other side of the scale where you can have all the choice you want.
Yeah. So there's lots more. Like for us next, hopefully that's given you a bit of a window into the detail that we can start going into now around the questions we can ask and the opportunities that are available to us, because there's lots we can then potentially do to work out how we can help drive basket spend, how we can help you offer more choice without risking wastage or financial losses or the feeling of being overwhelmed by complexity. So I won't say, I'm conscious of time, but there's the end opportunity here about dynamic box contents is about us being able to, the system being able to reconfigure box contents to get you down to zero on everything by the end of a selling window, because the magic combination is you giving the customer that sense of choice where actually you're in control, because you've told the system what you've got to sell and what you want to sell, but the customer still feels like they are the ones in control doing the shopping. So that's it.
I do have a little question. I'm not sure whether or not you've already answered it, but so what proportion of the actual boxes do have any swaps at all? And following on from that is, how do you know that it's the option of swaps that is maximising your spend and it's not just having a lot of choice of different types of boxes?
Well, that's a good question. The last time we looked at the percentage, it was about 55% were making swaps, but which was sort of surprising because George talks about it quite a lot, and it means that it was surprising that 45% of people don't, which also means that 45% of people aren't putting dislikes in there because there's a swap algorithm that runs.
So this is also the automated swap.
Yes.
Right.
So, but the vast majority of what we looked at there were customer choice. That makes sense.
And then you say customer choice, they've actively swapped it.
They have actively swapped it. It was about 92% when I looked at the split of that. 92% customers.
Of the 55%.
92% of the swaps that were made were done by the customer. 8% were handled by the algorithm. But you will find that the more engaged customers are, the more likely they are to override the swaps that have been made as well. Like the more engaged you are with the site. But there's still 40-odd% of George's customers that aren't making any swaps at all. And we know that 43%, I think we looked at last week, didn't buy, just bought a box. So are unlikely to have even visited the website in the week. So they've just said, I'll have a box every week or every fortnight, and that's it. So there is real opportunity there for that to happen. Your second part of your question was about how do you know about the basket spend and
Yeah, how do you know your customers?
swaps actually might cost basket spend in some instances, because when we looked at, if we look at some of the most popular swapped in items that are here,
Mushrooms for relationship.
but if we look at the most but if we look at avocado, lemons, ginger, turmeric, there is an argument to say that if you didn't make them available as a swap, a customer might buy them as an add-on, which is definitely money on top of your veg box. Whereas these might have, yes, there might have been a surcharge because they might have swapped them out for a cheaper item, but that could have cost you basket spend in that 1 week. But the judgment call you have to make is, what does that all add up to? Because if a customer has swapped out cabbage and they've got avocado instead, they might have paid £1.20 extra, but the avocado might have been listed for £2.50. But how valuable is it to you that the customer has avoided the cabbage they didn't want and they've got the avocado and they haven't had to pay the full amount for the avocado as an extra? Where is the value in that? And it could well be that what we're doing is we're saying, look, we're just trusting that by giving customer choice and freedom, but within the rules that we've set, is all going to add up to good stuff in the long term. It's going to add up to retention and more spend. And I was having this conversation at lunch, but the strange thing is that by giving customers choice, you're trying to encourage them to spend more money. But the more money, if they do have choice, the more money they spend must mean they're happier. So the customer's happier, and they're telling you that because they're spending more money, and you're happier as well. So on an isolated basis, it's impossible. Like I say, you might make a decision to say, I've got 25 avocados. I want to maximise the value of those. I don't want to risk the loss of like kale being swapped out of the boxes, so I'm not going to include them as a swap. And that might be the right decision. But the nice thing is you could do it this way 1 week and the other way the next week, and then you can see what happens.
For me, if something like right now for bunches of coriander or parsley or chervil, I know they'll sell out in the shop, so I want to get the maximum value for those. I won't do them as a swap at all. They'll only be an add-on, and that's the kind of thinking I would have.
Who's buying chervil? Nobody buys chervil.
Well, we don't have that many bunches, so there's enough people who will buy what we have.
Yeah. So the cool thing for me is that we're starting to go beyond what do you think? What would you do? It's like, well, let's have a look at what the data tells us is happening. And like things start to become a bit less anecdotal and more sort of scientific. Certainly giving you the information to confirm, to give you a greater level of confidence in the decisions that you're making. And if you don't know, why not try it in 2 different ways? And we've had plenty, like a good example of that is we've had users say, look, we don't offer swaps at the minute, we like the idea of it, but we don't know how we're going to make it work or whether we would lose money or lose product. And they've basically duplicated their range for a period of time, had like two versions of the same box, but one has been a standard box with zero swaps and one's been a choice box. So it starts the same, but one of them retails at £2.50 or £3 more, but you can make 2 or 3 swaps on it. So they're basically saying, if I'm going to put the customer's name on that box, I want to be paid, and we're going to pack in a slightly different way. I want to be paid a little bit more money for it, and they do that, and then they can see how the customer responds. Then you can make a decision. It's not my opinion or your opinion. No, they can see for themselves.
I think we're going to have to probably move out to the field.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry to rush you, but what time is it? It's